This meeting is called to order. Exactly 1 year ago today, the landmark Supreme Court decision in Massachusetts versus EPA made it clear that the EPA had to address climate change issues. The Court held, first, that greenhouse gases are pollutants that can be regulated under the Clean Air Act. Two, that under the Clean Air Act, the EPA Administrator must judge whether these emissions cause or contribute to air pollution which may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. And three, if the EPA Administrator does make a positive endangerment finding, it must regulate greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles. In May of last year, the President directed EPA and other agencies to prepare a regulatory response to the Massachusetts versus EPA case. In June of last year, Administrator Johnson told the Select Committee his response would be made public by the end of 2007. The response was to consist of an endangerment finding and a regulatory proposal to regulate these emissions from motor vehicles. Although depositions by congressional staff and media reports indicate that EPA completed its work and submitted its proposals to OMB and other Federal agencies for review, EPA did not release its work as planned. In January, when I requested that Administrator Johnson appear before the Select Committee to update us on EPA's efforts, I also requested these documents, which the Administrator initially agreed to provide. However, shortly before last month's hearing, and again during his appearance before the Select Committee, Administrator Johnson made it clear, both in writing and verbally, that the EPA would not provide the documents after all. The EPA's reasons for not providing the requested documents are flimsy and lack merit. Indeed, the EPA's purported reasons have been recognized by no committee of Congress as a basis to withhold documents, regardless of which party or member was sitting in the chair. The excuse of not providing documents because they would be confusing to the public is invalid and borderlines on insulting. And it simply is no answer to say that the documents are pre-decisional. That provides no lawful basis for a refusal to supply documents relevant to a lawful congressional inquiry. I had expected to resolve this dispute with the Administrator without having to resort to this action. But I'm disappointed to report that EPA has made no effort to accommodate the committee's request and has done nothing but repeated excuses that are without legal meaning. The members of the committee should know that I do not take the issuance of a subpoena lightly. In my 32 years as a member of Congress and my many years chairing subcommittees in both the Energy and Commerce and Resources Committees, this is the first time that I have ever found it necessary to issue a subpoena. But the EPA has placed us in that position, and so we must go forward. The Select Committee has both the right and the responsibility to obtain these documents so that we can understand exactly how EPA is planning on responding to the Supreme Court's landmark decision. I urge my colleagues to vote to uphold the rights of the committee and the House by supporting this motion. That completes the opening statement of the Chair. I now turn to recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me state that I support this Select Committee resolution, and I thank the Chair for working with me to refine the resolution's language. I agree the documents which the Select Committee is seeking from the EPA are within our authority and that the agency has no legal basis to deny providing us with the documents short of asserting executive privilege, which they have not done. However, I do want to take a few minutes to share some of my other thoughts and concerns about the use of these subpoenas. Generally, I believe that subpoenas should be rarely used. In the 10 years during which I chaired 2 standing committees of the House, the Committee on Science during the last 4 years of the Clinton administration, and the Committee on the Judiciary during the first 6 years of the Bush administration, I never issued a subpoena. I did on occasion remind representatives of those two administrations that Congress has constitutional responsibilities with respect to oversight of the executive branch. And I used that leverage to negotiate meaningful testimony and documentation to allow my committees to discharge their oversight obligations. However, I believe that the actual use of subpoenas can and should be a rarely used oversight device. The documents this subpoena seeks from the EPA are drafts and part of an ongoing Supreme Court mandated regulatory process. I am always hesitant about Congress intervening in a rulemaking process. If we know better than the regulatory agency what the answer is, then we should pass legislation to mandate that answer. Administrator Johnson testified before us 3 weeks ago that as a result of the enactment of last December's Energy Independence and Security Act, he was re-examining from a broader perspective both the Clean Air Act and other authorities to regulate greenhouse gases. In other words, the rules changed as a result of the December enactment. Since that hearing, he has announced his intention to use an advance notice of proposed rulemaking as the agency considers the specific effects of climate change and the potential regulation of greenhouse gas emissions from stationary and mobile sources. This leads me to wonder what the exact value of the documents sought by the subpoena will be, because they were a part of preliminary rulemaking, and what use they are to us now. Except as historical documents showing where the agency's preliminary thinking was going last year, they would seem to have only limited use to us as policymakers. Perhaps these documents will serve as great political fodder for the majority to use in attacking the administration, but I don't think they're going to be very relevant as a result of December's energy bill being signed into law. In any case, I have long stated my opposition to the fragmented use of statutes like the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act to confront the challenges of global warming. This was not the purpose for which they were enacted. Only comprehensive legislation, rather than fragmented regulations, are likely to result in meaningful actions. In conclusion, I will support this resolution for institutional reasons, though I do have concern that these documents are being sought for political purposes and will have only limited use in helping the Congress develop realistic policies to confront global warming. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time is yielded back. And so now the business before the committee is to consider a motion to be offered by the Chair with respect to the issuance of subpoenas to the EPA. The clerk will read the motion.
Resolved that the Chairman of the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming is directed to issue subpoenas to the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency as necessary to obtain each of the following documents.
I ask unanimous consent
One,
to
the draft regulatory proposal that was prepared.
I ask unanimous consent to suspend the reading of the resolution. It is all before the members and has been presented to the members for their inspection before the vote. And without objection, so ordered, the resolution will be considered as read. Are there any other members seeking recognition for the purpose of speaking on? Chair sees none. Are there any members seeking to make amendments to this motion? Chair sees none. Then the question before the committee is whether it will adopt the motion to authorize the Chairman to issue subpoenas to the EPA. The clerk will read the roll.
Mr. Blumenauer. Aye. Mr. Blumenauer votes aye. Mr. Inslee. Mr. Inslee votes aye. Mr. Larson. Aye. Mr. Larson votes aye. Ms. Solis. Aye. Ms. Solis votes aye. Ms. Hertha-Sandlin. Ms. Hertha-Sandlin votes aye. Mr. Cleaver. Mr. Cleaver votes aye. Mr. Hall. Aye. Mr. Hall votes aye. Mr. McNerney. Aye. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner. Aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner votes aye. Mr. Shadegg. Mr. Walden. Aye. Mr. Walden votes aye. Mrs. Miller. Mr. Sullivan. Aye. Mrs. Blackburn. Are there any other members seeking permission to vote? Mr. Markey.
Votes aye.
Mr. Markey votes aye. The total is 12 votes aye, 0 votes for nay.
Then the motion is agreed to. The staff is directed to draw up the necessary subpoena powers in consultation with the House Office of General Counsel, and will cause those to be served on the EPA Administrator, and copies of those documents will be delivered to every member of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the resolution calls for the concurrence of the ranking member, so I'd like to see him too.
There will be nothing that occurs that is in any way at variance with what is in the resolution. And the committee thanks all of the members for their cooperation. And with that, we will turn to the other business before the committee, which is a hearing on climate change and aviation. And again, with the thanks of the committee, we will begin the hearing on aviation. So this second hearing today is called to order. The Select Committee analyzes all causes of global warming. It cannot let aviation fly under the radar. Aviation emissions currently amount for 12% of U.S. transportation emissions and 3% of emissions nationally and worldwide. The impact of these emissions cannot be ignored. The CO2, nitrous oxide, and particulate matter leaked into high altitudes alter our climate. Scientific debate does not center on whether CO2 is in the stratosphere is harmful. It questions how much more harmful CO2 may be when compounded by other aviation emissions in the stratosphere. The aviation industry has improved emission output through technology, but the rapidly increasing number of flights will exacerbate aviation emissions. The FAA has forecasted over 1 billion commercial passengers annually by 2015, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has predicted that even assuming efficiency and infrastructure improvements, aviation emissions could double or triple by 2050. Aviation must answer for the heat trappings of their own success. Today's hearing on aviation emissions should not be viewed as a mere blip on the screen. States, cities, and organizations have petitioned the EPA to regulate aviation greenhouse gas emissions. Aviation fuels are currently being considered under a cap-and-trade system in Congress. The European Commission plans to integrate domestic and U.S. flights into the EU trading system. As local governments and other nations move to limit the impact of aviation on the environment, Congress cannot linger in a holding pattern. The witnesses before us today address the 3 factors responsible for aviation emissions: operations, technologies, and fuel. Regulating fuel emissions largely falls to the Environmental Protection Agency. The Federal Aviation Administration can discuss its vision to streamline aviation operations for more efficient flights. And the Natural Resources Defense Council's Transportation Fuel Director can discuss aviation fuel options and consequences. The Air Transport Association and International Air Transport Association can discuss different approaches to aviation cap-and-trade regulations. Virgin Atlantic General Counsel Jill Brady was unable to attend today's hearing but submitted written testimony discussing Virgin's groundbreaking commercial flight using biofuels and support for an international cap-and-trade scheme. I encourage the public to read her testimony as well as the testimony. As aviation's contribution to global warming creeps up the IPCC charts, we cannot wait until it becomes a bigger threat. At one time, the number of automobiles on the road was not a significant contributor to global warming emissions. But even after that harm was established, decades of inattention and legislative delays led us to the environmental emergency that formed this Select Committee. With that in mind, I look forward to hearing everyone's testimony today. And now I turn to recognize the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for scheduling this hearing today, and I look forward to learning more about this topic. One of my many curiosities about this topic, perhaps the most pressing, is why the aviation industry is a major focus in the global warming debate. By all measures, aviation produces just a tiny fraction of the world's greenhouse gases. In the U.S., aviation accounts for only 3% of emissions compared to electricity generation, ground transport, industry, and agriculture, all of which produce many times more greenhouse gases. Furthermore, the aviation industry has been doing a good job of improving fuel efficiency, because if they didn't do that, they'd all be out of business with fuel prices being what they are. And it didn't take heavy-handed government regulations such as cap and trade to make it happen. In the past 4 years, U.S. airlines have improved fuel efficiency by 11%, mostly due to the market-driven pressures of the high price of oil and the lower value of the dollar. This is positive progress, and the industry deserves commendation for this improvement. Despite these numbers, the European Union wants to include aviation in its emission trading scheme, which would clearly throw additional costs onto the airline industry. I don't understand why government regulators want to punish an industry that's already making good progress without the pressure of regulation. Then again, I don't understand how hampering the economy with regulatory schemes like cap and trade is the proper way to confront climate change in the first place. Last month, an EU commissioner said that if the U.S. didn't join the EU emission trading scheme or apply a similar program to U.S. airlines by 2010, EU states would begin denying incoming flights in 2012. I wonder if this threat also applies to India and China, each of which has a growing airline industry to meet the demand of their growing economies. In fact, testimony today will show that these two countries will build 100 new airports over the next decade to meet the demand. And no, India and China don't have emissions trading system of their own, and it doesn't look like they're going to get one soon. There may be advances in clean fuel technology that help reduce airlines' greenhouse gas output even further. As I've said many times, technological advancement must be part of any plan to confront climate change. However, I do not believe that any advances in fuel technology should come at the expense of safety. There are already some concerns that biofuels can cause engines to stall, which is a safety risk I believe is too great, especially considering the airline's minimal contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. If large-scale changes are needed in the aviation industry, the UN's International Civil Aviation Organization is the best place to address these questions. And it isn't often that I embrace a UN organization to do anything. However, in this case, the UN is taking a more thoughtful approach to aviation emissions and technology than is the European Union. When it comes to global warming, many people cry that the sky is falling. But I worry that if we make careless changes to the airline industry, it will be the planes falling from the sky. I believe it's more prudent at this point to recognize the good work that the airlines are doing before we force changes that could jeopardize both the safety and economic health of the industry. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
In response, why we're concerned about an industry that has only 3%, I just think we all have to get on the bus, everybody, whether we're 3% or 0.5% or 0.1%, we all got to get on the bus. And we're not going to solve this problem unless every industry participates. That includes Congress, that includes us in our homes, that includes the airline industry. So it's hardly going to be an excuse. And obviously I'm from Seattle and aerospace industry, and you know, you might think a hometown team would say, well, just ignore that industry, but you can't ignore any industry. So I have good news to report to the committee, and we're going to hear about it today. There's some bragging rights coming out of Seattle that to do my job of bragging about my hometown team. Let me brag about them a little bit. The first biofuels-operated commercial jet airplane, the jet, was manufactured in Seattle with the Boeing 747 using standardized engines with no modifications whatsoever to the engines. It flew on February 24th, 237 miles from London to Amsterdam safely, didn't fall out of the sky, no injuries reported, and it was a smooth flight. And it used a fuel generated by Imperial Biofuels in Grays Harbor, Washington. Used 3,175 gallons of biofuels. It was produced by Imperium. This was kind of an all-Washington State project with help by Sir Richard Branson, and it just shows what the power of the human intellect can do in aerospace, and we look forward to more successes. I also want to point out in the aerospace industry, our ground operations are a part of this as well, and there's really some good things we can do on the ground. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport has done some great things reducing its CO2 emissions in its operations. They have, they're using 25% green power. They've reduced their electrical consumption 24%, and they're implementing a way to use preconditioned air so you don't have to use the airplane engines to condition the air in the airplane while they're sitting on the tarmac. So we're developing some great systemic things in Seattle, and I look forward to hearing about more success. Thanks.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson.
I want to thank the chairman and thank him for holding this hearing today, and I also bring with me some Augie and Ray's bragging rights from the aerospace industry. And, my hometown is that of East Hartford, Connecticut, where my dad worked at Pratt & Whitney for 37 years, where we continue to keep the eagle flying, as we say, from East Hartford, and proud as well. And I think all the more reason to have hearings like this and to set standards and goals, to see the kind of technological advances that, in fact, can be made that are going to help us all in our effort to limit the carbon footprint that we have and create greater efficiencies that will improve our travel and, of course, save overall dollars. The Pratt & Whitney announced the successful design of engines that will be on Mitsubishi, and with technology that reduces air emissions 40% below the 1996 regulations, and saving taxpayers $600,000 each year due to lower operating and maintenance cost and improved productivity. It does, Mr. Chairman, beg the question, too, perhaps at a future date we could have the Air Force here and the Pentagon, in terms of listening to their testimony, inasmuch as they are the largest consumers of energy in the United States government system, and the Air Force, obviously, is the largest consumer of fuel in the country. And with that, I look forward to hearing from our testimony, and thank the chairman for holding this insightful hearing.
Thank you. I appreciate the gentleman from Connecticut. And now we turn and recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Larson and Mr. Inslee pretty much covered what I would say in an opening comment. My opening comment, I would only add, and then yield back the balance of my time, that I think probably there are a lot of questions that have not been answered, and I think that we've got to go through a period of examining what happens to the pollution at a higher altitude. I mean, whether there is a greater impact, even though we have 3% emissions, it could be that it creates problems of its own. We don't know, and so I think it is appropriate that we examine it, and I appreciate the hearing and our guests who've come here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. With that, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also would like to welcome our witnesses and thank the chairman for holding this hearing today, and reassure our ranking member that I, for one, do not, as a member of this committee, want to punish an industry that's already done a lot in their own interest and also in the environment's interest by installing winglets or by removing magazines, which add up to a surprising amount of weight, actually. I don't think there's been too many customer complaints about some of the magazines that have been removed from airlines. You know, any efforts that are being made not only in the air but on the ground, as I understand, to reduce consumption of release of greenhouse gases from ground equipment that's involved with loading airlines with baggage or food services or what have you. Proud to say that in my district, Stewart Airport, which has just been taken over by the Port Authority of New Jersey, is going to be according to their announcement at their big press conference, they would like to be the first carbon negative airport and compensate with solar and geothermal and passive features and so on, and with using alternative fuels as much as possible on the ground for the emissions that they release in the air. Now, that may be a big ticket, and I admire them for making such an ambitious announcement. And I wish them luck in meeting that goal, and will do everything I can to try to help. But I just think I agree with, I guess it was Mr. Inslee who said that we all have to try, I as an individual, we as members of Congress, and you as members of your companies and your industry, in order to have a chance at reaching the goals that this committee is constituted to find a route to, those being energy independence and to stop the advance of climate change, that we all must do our part. And I'm appreciative of the fact that the industry we're hearing from today has already done a lot along those lines, and looking forward to hearing what else you think can be done, and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from New York for his words, and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome the panel here for their testimony. And I look at all the issues, I look at this issue like I look at all the issues surrounding global warming as not only a threat but as an opportunity. In this case, there's an opportunity to find ways to make the airline industry more efficient, which will ultimately save money. There's been some very good recommendations out there that are worth pursuing. One by Mr. Lovins, Amory Lovins, to encourage the airline industry through tax considerations to retire some of the older, more inefficient planes with new ones. That certainly wouldn't hurt the state of Washington. And there's all kinds of things I think that we can do to improve airline efficiency, which would reduce greenhouse gases. So I look forward to what this hearing might produce. Thank you very much. And I yield back to the chair.
I thank the gentleman from California, and now on to our panelists. And again, we want to thank them for being here today. And first, I'd like to recognize, as the chair comes back and assumes his position, Dan Elwell, the Assistant Administrator for Aviation Policy, Planning and Environment with the United States Federal Aviation Administration, and Mr. Bob Myers, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you both for joining us, and with that I yield to the Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, and Mr. Elwell, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Markey. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you, Congressman Sensenbrenner, and the members of the Select Committee. The environment is a page one issue, no matter where page one happens to be. It was a central theme of the FAA's annual forecast conference last month and the subject of Acting Administrator Sturgill's speech to the International Aviation Club. Whether you followed the proceedings in Bali or the recent meeting of the Group on International Aviation and Climate Change in Montreal, one thing is clear. Aviation's contribution to global climate change is getting a lot of attention, which is as it should be. And that's why I'm so pleased to share with you today both U.S. aviation's exceptional environmental record to date and our plans to make it even better. The bottom line for us at the FAA, and indeed for every citizen of this great land, is that when you have the opportunity to do something for the environment, you do it. This issue should neither be partisan nor polemic. As global citizens, we've got to move forward with each opportunity. At the FAA, that is specifically what's happening. We recognize the significance of taking care of the planet. In a day and age when aviation activity is on the verge of doubling, where annual passenger totals will soar past 1 billion, it is imperative that we take steps that will make a lasting difference. Those steps form the very foundation of our plan for the next generation of air traffic control. NextGen is known as our blueprint for the future. It also happens to be our plan to keep aviation green. With the aviation industry experiencing record growth, aircraft emissions remain a central environmental challenge as they contribute to global climate change and impact local air quality and noise near airports. From a business standpoint, failure to address these concerns could slow or stop the growth of aviation and the benefits it brings to our nation. Aviation accounts for roughly 10 million jobs in the U.S. and over 5% of our national GDP. For the record, as already said, aviation greenhouse gas emissions represent less than 3% of the world's total. Nevertheless, we must do what it takes to reduce that number. To provide some context, there is some good news. When you compare 2006 to the year 2000, U.S. commercial aviation moved 12% more passengers and 22% more freight while burning less fuel. Between 2000 and 2006, aviation emissions in the U.S. actually declined, that's right, declined by about 4%, reducing our carbon output by about 6 million tons. During the same period, European aviation emissions increased some 30%. In light of this data, recent rhetoric from the EU threatening to cut or reduce U.S. flights to Europe if we don't pay for our carbon is at best impolitic, at worst hypocritical. It's not surprising that the rest of the world rejected the European plan during the 36th International Civil Aviation Organization Assembly in Montreal last year. We, like most of the world, believe that the most efficient means of reducing aviation emissions is to reduce the amount of fuel that is burned. The aviation industry has made and continues to make significant improvements. Aircraft fuel efficiency has improved 70% over the last 40 years, and it's only getting better. On a per-passenger mile basis, Boeing's new 787 will be as fuel efficient as today's subcompact hybrid car. These advances are taking place without a single government-imposed emission standard for CO2, and no mention of a cap. In the past 4 years alone, U.S. airlines have improved their fuel efficiency by 11%. U.S. airlines have voluntarily committed to an additional 30% improvement by 2025. With that said, forecasts are one thing. Getting there is quite another. But with the price of oil over $100 a barrel, the motivation to reduce fuel consumption has never been greater. But back to what the FAA is doing. We have already implemented a program to reduce vertical separation between aircraft at high altitudes. It's saving about 3 million tons of CO2 per year. We're redesigning airspace. We're altering the routes planes use to descend into airports, both here and overseas. That'll allow us to use smooth, continuous approaches that burn less fuel and make less noise while doing so. In short, any place and any way we can make a difference, we are. And as we head into the design, development, and execution of NextGen, I think that getting to zero emissions growth is a reasonable goal. In my written testimony, I described the 5-pillar approach that will get us there. It takes advantage of efforts like our Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, the Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative, FAA's proposed research consortium called CLEAN, and the Partnership for Air Transportation Noise and Emissions Reduction. Aviation has faced many challenges in the past. We've solved them by coming together to produce collaborative efforts that have changed the way we operate as an agency and have literally changed the way Americans fly. I'm confident that we'll continue with that in the environmental challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elwell, very much. Our second witness on the first panel is Bob Myers, the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Office of Air and Radiation at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Mr. Myers and I have been walking around the corridors of the Rayburn building here since the beginning of time almost, huh?
Something like that, Mr. Chairman, yes. I'm sorry, your mic cut out. I could not.
Oh, it did? Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So when did you start working up here in the Rayburn building?
When I started in the Rayburn, I started working for Congress in the late 1970s.
1970s, yeah, just about the same time I arrived. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, we welcome you here.
Yes.
And we appreciate your testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee concerning the important issue of aviation emissions and climate change. On December 4th and December 31st of last year, EPA received 2 petitions to set greenhouse gas emission standards for aircraft engines under the Clean Air Act. One petition was filed by several states, the City of New York, the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and the District of Columbia. The other was filed by several environmental organizations. The petitions raised similar but not identical issues. The relief requested in the petition centers on the finding of endangerment and adoption of Clean Air Act regulations. As Administrator Johnson recently informed the committee, EPA intends to issue an advance notice of proposed rulemaking later this spring. This ANPR will cover a variety of issues arising from the Supreme Court's decision in Mass v. EPA, and among the issues addressed, the ANPR will seek comment and relevant data concerning the 2 aviation petitions the agency has received. The ANPR will also seek comment and data with respect to additional petitions the agency has received concerning non-road and marine sources. Through the ANPR process, EPA expects to gain valuable information and public insights regarding greenhouse gas emissions from such sources, air connections among various Clean Air Act provisions, and possible regulatory requirements. Your letter of invitation requested I address 4 issues. Some of the questions posited were similar to the questions previously received by the agency that were addressed in my letter to the committee of March 31st. In today's testimony, I would like to provide further response to your concerns and specifically information regarding emissions, potential use of biofuels, FAA coordination, and the EU emissions trading scheme. Very briefly, the compounds emitted from aircraft jet engines that directly relate to climate change are carbon dioxide and small amounts of methane and nitrous oxide. There are also emissions which more indirectly affect radiation forcing and climate. As detailed in my written statement, the work of the International Panel on Climate Change, reports of the Council of the International Civil Aviation Organization, and other sources have examined these emissions. Overall, aircraft operations in the U.S. are estimated to account for about 10% of greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. transportation sector and approximately 3% of total U.S. GHG emissions. Section 231 of the Clean Air Act gives EPA authority to determine whether aircraft emissions contribute to air pollution, which may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare, and to set emission standards following a positive finding. Section 232 of the Act provides FAA with the authority to certify aircraft engines for emission purposes and to enforce compliance with EPA's standards. EPA has utilized this authority on several occasions, including the 1982 standards for HC or hydrocarbons, 1997 standards for NOx and CO, and further NOx standards in 2005. These standards essentially cover criteria pollutants and precursors for purposes of improving local air quality. With respect to fuel, commercial aircraft use a petroleum-based fuel commonly referred to as Jet A kerosene. In 2006, the air travel industry and FAA established the Commercial Aviation and Alternative Fuels Initiative to explore the potential use of alternative fuels for aircraft for energy security and possible environmental improvements. And since the FAA is primary authority in this area, that I would defer to the FAA to address their ongoing work in this area. Overall, as mentioned, U.S. aviation emissions have declined in recent years. Moreover, it's likely that aircraft fuel efficiency will improve in the future due to technology developments for lighter and more aerodynamic aircraft, as well as more efficient engines. In the longer term, the expected increase in air traffic and lead times that are necessary for technology change and deployment could affect recent trends. As indicated previously, our upcoming NPR will provide a context in which these issues can be assessed. With respect to coordination with the FAA, various offices within EPA and FAA are in frequent contact regarding aviation and environmental issues, including the Next Generation Air Transport System Plan. EPA has had substantial interactions with FAA in the development of aviation GHG inventories, and we expect to continue our coordination with FAA in developing our responses to the 2 administrative petitions. Finally, you asked whether EPA was examining how the U.S. might comply with the EU trading scheme. As my letter of March 31st addresses this issue, I would just generally state that the EPA technical staff have provided background data and information regarding emissions and cap-and-trade programs during an interagency process. Again, thank you, and Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for this opportunity, and this concludes my prepared statement.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, very much, and the chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Elwell, the Next Gen program was formed to plan for the future of aviation. in both your testimony and your response to the Select Committee's letter last year, your environmental efforts seem to be tangential rather than central to the future of aviation. Given the future of carbon-constrained economy and the inevitability of some sort of European aviation emissions cap and trade system, how is it that you have not focused on global warming emissions as you plan for a rapidly increasing aviation industry?
Well, Mr. Chairman, in referencing NextGen, we have an integrated work plan. It's a rather large document, but we have devoted an entire section of the integrated work plan, which is basically the template from which we will implement NextGen. And the chapter is dedicated to environmental considerations and how we will mitigate our environmental footprint. So I wouldn't characterize our treatment of the environmental issue with regard to NextGen as tangential.
Does the FAA see coal to liquid fuels as the future of jet fuel?
Well, coal to liquid fuels is one area of alternative fuels being looked at, and the initiative I mentioned in my testimony, CAFE, or Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuel Initiative, is dedicated to the furthering or the proposal for alternative fuels that have a net decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So to the extent to which coal to liquid can achieve that, then yes, we would be for it. But there's as you are well aware, sequestration issues and life cycle issues.
Now, the Virgin Atlantic and Continental are testing biofuels in their planes. Air New Zealand is funding research into biofuels. What work is being done to support biofuel development at your agency, aside from a biofuels demonstration test flight?
Excuse me. Again, as part of our central participation in CAFE and in the Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative and our partnership program for lower emissions, we're intricately involved both in centers of excellence with university research, again, CAFE and ACCRI, in all aspects of alternative fuel research.
Mr. Myers, as you point out in your testimony, EPA's decision on whether to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from the aviation sector under Section 231 of the Clean Air Act depends on an identical determination as Massachusetts versus EPA as to whether the emissions cause or contribute to air pollution that may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. We know from EPA staff depositions to Congress that EPA finished the endangerment finding for motor vehicles and found that indeed EPA did believe that these emissions are dangerous. Since you have concluded that these emissions are dangerous when they come out of vehicles that drive on the roads, would it not be arbitrary to conclude that these emissions are not dangerous when they come out of vehicles that fly in the skies? Can you turn on your microphone, please?
Thank you for the question. I think I might say that the documents that you're referring to were draft documents. We have had correspondence with the committee with respect to these documents. So as draft documents, any views and documents would not be conclusions.
Well, if you do formally conclude that greenhouse gas emissions from motor vehicles are dangerous, is there any reason that EPA would not conclude that emissions coming from aviation are not also as dangerous?
I probably learned a long time ago not to engage in hypotheticals, so on that hypothetical, I'm not available to give you a detailed answer. I would say very clearly the endangerment language in 231 is very similar to that with the ICTA petition in Section 202, and when we look at greenhouse gases, we understand which pollutants they are, and they're emitted for both mobile sources, on-road, as well as off-road, as well as aircraft.
And do you plan on including the text of the endangerment finding you've already completed for motor vehicle emissions in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking?
Mr. Chairman, we're just initiating work now on the NPRM, so decisions regarding final documents and final support documents have not been made at this point in time. I think as our letter to the committee and other committees on the Hill indicates that we plan to utilize the work that was performed by EPA over the last year in response to the greenhouse gas petition and with reference to the President's 2010 initiative.
I thank you. Chair now turns and recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from Wisconsin.
No questions.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Elwell, do you see a conflict between some move to reduce emissions and a strong safety record? Is there a conflict between trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and safety?
Mr. Cleaver, if you're asking are they mutually exclusive, clearly not. We can pursue both, and we clearly have. We are currently in the safest period that we've ever seen, and we also are just wrapping up a decline in fuel burn, despite the fact that we've carried more people and freight. So I think the record is clear that we can do both.
I raised a question only because there was discussion about planes falling, and I thought it might be important for us to just get that on the record, that the committee is not saying ignore public safety, concentrate on greenhouse gas emissions. What is the future, based on your analysis, in the aviation industry with regards to reducing greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, and I'm not sure whether who does whether FAA or whomever would look at the upper atmospheric emissions and whether there's a difference there than on Earth. Do you have any thoughts about that or knowledge about whether that has ever been looked into or whether you believe that it ought to be looked into?
Well, we certainly believe it needs to be looked into. In my written testimony, I go through the pillars of our plan to go forward, and the first pillar is a better understanding of the impacts of the various emissions that combustion produces. One thing we know for sure is that CO2 is not altitude dependent, so there is no multiplying effect of CO2 wherever it's emitted. And the belief, and it has been published before, that the other pollutants have some magnification effect at altitude, has recently, the IPCC has actually most recently said that the science is so uncertain as to that, quote, multiplier, as to them not giving one, actually. And so our involvement in ACCRI, Aviation Climate Change Research Initiative, is focused on exactly those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York State, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Mr. Myers, I wanted to ask you, in your written testimony, you mentioned the Fischer-Tropsch synthetic, which is was produced by the Nazis for various fuels, including aviation fuel, I believe, during World War II. The Fischer-Tropsch reaction is apparently, I believe there are a couple of studies I've heard about that are going on now, to pull carbon dioxide out of the air, process the carbon in it into a liquid fuel, upon which combustion releases a similar amount of carbon dioxide back into the air. It's a carbon neutral process, which would provide us, if one uses in parts of the country or parts of the world where the sun shines almost constantly or where the wind blows almost constantly, using those renewables as the energy to drive the Fischer-Tropsch reaction. Are you aware of any studies along those lines, and what are your thoughts about it?
I'd be happy to get back to the record on specific studies that we be aware of. My office is primarily the regulatory office at EPA, and we have an office of research and development. But generically, obviously, it's going to depend. Fischer-Tropsch as a process is going to depend on the feedstock, and you can use Fischer-Tropsch with coal, and has been done for some time, as you mentioned, both in World War II and South Africa in more recent years. So I would say this is probably theoretically possible, but I would love to get back for the record with more specifics.
Okay, I'm curious about this because I've been hearing about it, and if you do an internet search for Fischer-Tropsch, all this, a lot of sites show up with different things on them, and you can't believe everything you read on the internet, but wouldn't it be nice if it were true? I'm hoping that it is. And Mr. Elwell, I don't know if you want to comment on that, since Mr. Myers deferred to you on that part of his testimony. And I had one other question for you also.
And no to the Fischer-Tropsch. That is out of my realm.
Okay. I mean, it just seems to me that using an existing carbon fuel like coal, obviously, is something we know how to do with that process to create liquid fuels, but we also know, so far anyway, that we're faced with either sequestering massive amounts of carbon dioxide or using a fuel that could already be used, in other ways, whereas, storing solar or some other renewable. See, the big problem people always say about the sun and the wind is you can't always predict when it's going to shine, and you can't always predict when it's going to blow. But if you can store it and basically use the liquid as a battery, or use hydrogen as a battery in a similar way by separating water into hydrogen and oxygen, and then burn the hydrogen, that's not something I'm advocating for airplane fuel, but it is something that could be used for generation of electricity, for instance. And this is a similar thing with Fischer-Tropsch. If a carbon dioxide neutral process could be developed using it. The other question I had, you mentioned continuous descent as part of NextGen, and I sat on the Aviation Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, and I've been very interested in that because, particularly in my district, we have a couple of towns, town of Pound Ridge and the town of Warwick in the 19th Congressional District, that are being affected or feel that they are being affected already by the New York airspace redesign, and they're hearing that stepping down of planes going from descent to hover to descent to hover as they wait to be cleared for the next 2,000-foot drop. And of course the engines have to rev up to hold altitude and then rev down to descend. And once they can get onto continuous descent, they hopefully will be less noticed. They might be making as much noise sort of on average, but it's that change in pitch that I think is especially noticed by people out in the country and where they're used to the peace and quiet. Is this something that can be done in any parts of, for instance, the New York airspace before full implementation of NextGen?
NextGen, before full implementation, it can be done. In fact, over 25% of the approaches right now in LA are using CDA. We are putting it in where we can. Obviously, probably one of the most difficult places to do it consistently is in the Northeast sector, which is why the redesign is so important. But once, as you mentioned, once NextGen is fully implemented, our hope is to have CDA be the norm, and step-down arrivals would be the exception. And you're right, the ability to go to idle from altitude and bring up your power half a mile from the threshold, huge emissions benefits, and below 6,000 feet, about a 30% reduction in overall noise.
So it's good both for noise and for CO2 emissions, and that's what we're after. My time is done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. I thank the gentleman. Mr. Elwell, if you wanted to do a great job on future gen, what kind of resources would you need the Congress
Well, a little bit over a year ago, the FAA, the administration, proposed our next-gen reauthorization bill, and it offered some financing reform initiatives that would, we believe, allow us to pay for and implement next-gen as quickly as we're able. It had some dedicated funding for next-gen. Obviously, that legislation has lagged some, but we absolutely need your cooperation and partnership, Congress, in the proper and timely funding for the capital expenditures for next-gen and for...
Can you give me a number?
Number?
Yeah.
We had, in our proposal, planned to spend $4.6 billion over 5 years just on next-gen. And the President's budget supports that, so that's what we're asking for.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mr. Meyer, in January, the Select Committee sent you a letter asking about the EPA's commitment to aviation emissions and climate change. Your reply, which we received 2 days ago, stated that EPA has not taken a formal stance on the effects of aviation on climate change. When will you address this issue, and will it be separate from an endangerment finding?
We'll be addressing these issues as well as other issues affecting climate change in the context of our ANPRM.
Okay, so you'll be doing it in the context of the announcement that you made last week?
Right.
Okay, that's helpful to us. Does the gentleman from Missouri have any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other question. I was intrigued by Mr. Hall's comment about the airport in his district. Is that something, for either of you, is that something that you believe to be possible? And if so, is it something that you would encourage, where airports would move toward becoming carbon neutral, at least in the ground operation, with renewable fuels and so forth?
Absolutely encourage it. In fact, we have a program called VALE, Voluntary Airport Lower Emissions Program, in which we allow airports to spend both airport improvement program monies and passenger facility charge monies on electric vehicles, tankering fuel as opposed to using trucks, all of the things that were mentioned by your colleague, electric plug-into airplanes for cooling, and so that they don't need to turn on the engines. So yes, the short answer is absolutely.
Is there any? Do you have any materials, any documentation, any that we would be I would be able to look at?
Yes, we do.
Yeah,
sir.
thank you very much. I would really like to see that. That's very intriguing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you. And just so I can clarify, is it possible, Mr. Myers, that when the advance notice for proposed rulemaking comes out, that there won't be something in there? Is one of the options that there won't be a consideration of the endangerment finding, or there won't be an aviation component? Is that also possible?
We are in process of drafting, so I think I should probably allow for any possibility during that process of drafting an interagency review. But as the letter indicated that was sent to your committee and others, we were looking at the NPRM as a vehicle to address. We not only have 2 aviation petitions, we have 5 other petitions covering off-road, and marine. And so traditionally, under processes, when we get petitions of this sort, as we did last year when we had a petition with regard to leaded aircraft, general aviation aircraft gasoline, we solicit the information we need to address the petitions through an ANPRM. So that would be our intent with respect to the aircraft petitions. Relative to your question on endangerment, as I think we referenced in the letter, that we'd be looking both at the science of climate change and that relationship to the endangerment finding that would occur, and that would be in the context of the NPRM also.
And is it possible that it will come out without any actual proposal of either endangerment or regulations for any sector?
Well, fairly much by definition, advance notice does not normally conclude with a proposal. It's meant as an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, not as a formal notice of proposed rulemaking.
So you're saying that it doesn't necessarily mean that either the endangerment finding or something on
well, I think what we tried to indicate was that during the course of our consideration over last year, and as the committee knows, there was a lot of work done with reference to not only vehicle emissions, but the endangerment issue, and also not covered by the ICTA petition, the fuels. We looked very heavily at the fuels. This administrator has testified to, with respect to previous hearings, we had the passage of the energy bill to take into consideration in December. So in the context of our letter and explanation of our plan going forward was to examine the interconnections in the Clean Air Act that occur both between the mobile and stationary sources. Obviously, with respect to the Massachusetts v. EPA decision, the context of regulatory decisions are essentially channeled through the funnel of endangerment finding in accordance with the opinion, in accordance with the structure of the statute.
So at the pace at which this is proceeding, it is possible that the President could leave office, President Bush could leave office, without any decision actually having been made on endangerment, and without any decision actually having been made on, in this one hearing's focus, on the role of aviation in a solution to the problem.
Well, I think the path forward the Administrator has outlined is to issue an ANPRM this spring, allowing for a public comment period, and then at the end of the process, we would consider, on the basis of that information, how best to respond to the Mass v. EPA case and its implications throughout the Act.
And how long is the comment period?
That has not been established. Traditionally, in this area, one would look at it's a substantial notice, a substantial issue. So normally, 60 days would be a rough minimum time.
So 60 days for the advanced.
Well, I want to be clear. We have not determined the period of actual public comment. I won't determine that. The Administrator will determine that when he would sign the advance notice. So I'm just in normal practice. In order to give sufficient notice on large issues, and certainly the large issues with respect to Mass v. EPA, normally a 60 and perhaps 90-day process would be appropriate. I just want to emphasize that's the decision that the Administrator will make at the time the document's prepared.
I guess from my perspective, there's been a lot of time to think about these issues since the Supreme Court decision, and my request to you would be to consider making this as brief a period of time as possible. I think people are ready to comment.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and we will certainly convey that to the Administrator. I think the balance here on any public comment periods between having a fulsome comment and the ability of all parties to provide information, as well as the desire to move expeditiously.
And I agree with that. And that has to be balanced against the concern that the EPA is just running out the clock on the Bush administration and doesn't intend on actually making any decision before the President leaves office. So it's in that context that these decisions are being made about the length of time that is going to be given for comment as opposed to action. So that's just the, reality of it, I understand, but I would caution that will be perceptually how it will be viewed given the length of time that has been given thus far to think about the issue. So my time has expired. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you. Mr. Myers, was your agency, was EPA involved at all in the Air Force procurement decision about the new tanker? The Air Force decided to buy a tanker that uses 24% more fuel per mile of product than another aircraft that uses 24% more efficient, and therefore has 24% less CO2 emissions. Were your agencies involved in that at all?
I will be happy to check on that. I have no memory of any involvement by the Office of Air and Radiation.
I doubt the Office of Radiation, but I just wonder if the EPA in general would have been involved. And
I will need to check with the other offices, and we will be happy to provide that for the record.
The reason I ask is that this is kind of a new issue to me, but it seems to me one thing we need to start thinking about in our federal procurement when we're buying aircraft, to think about the CO2 emissions. And we had one product that, you know, reduces CO2 emissions by a full quarter, and we didn't buy it. We bought a competitor, also happened to be significantly produced in Europe, which is another issue. If you have any guidance on that, I'd be appreciative, because it seems to me that's something we ought to be thinking about. Mr. Elwell, I'm told that the FAA's budget requested $300 million for environmental stewardship, but the primary goal of those was noise pollution abatement, while only about $10 million was for researching new aircraft technology to help reduce emissions. Is that the situation, and is that really adequate to the task if we really want to reduce emissions?
Well, as I mentioned, noise, or in my written testimony, noise remains the major concern for local communities and local airports. And the money that you're talking about is spent for installation for noise, for infrastructure noise mitigation at airports. I think the stewardship of every dollar that we get for research, particularly in developmental research for design, engine and airframe, is spent primarily, we leverage every dollar, I should say, with our Center of Excellence, with the MIT administered partner program. So we can always do more. The challenges we have budgetarily, I think we do the best with what the agency has.
I'm sorry, the 90% of that is used in for infrastructure. Whose infrastructure improvements are you referring to?
You mean the $300 million for
yes,
noise?
you said the bulk of it goes to infrastructure improvements of insulation and the like. Whose infrastructure are you talking about?
We're talking about residents and inhabitants within the noise-affected area of airports.
Well, we certainly would encourage you to think more aggressively on trying to embrace these new technologies, because we think they're happening. Boeing has a new airplane, the 787, has 20% more fuel efficiency than any any other plane on the market. There's great things going on. By the way, could you give us, I was talking to somebody yesterday just by happenstance about turboprop technology that may be being looked at. You may have talked about this already. Do you have any thoughts about that, or is that something that you're supporting? I'm told that it has markedly better fuel efficiency if we can get over some of the noise issues.
I've read some of the same things, and don't know much more than what you're saying, other than there is some advancements being made in turboprop technology, quieter turboprop engines, more fuel-efficient turboprop engines, and again, anything that reduces noise and emissions, we are in favor of. And just to add to your comment about the money that we're spending, we do, as I mentioned earlier, before you came in, about our reauthorization proposal, have significant increases in funding for this fundamental or the developmental research for engines and airframe and for emissions.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired. I don't know if the gentleman from Missouri has any other questions. So we thank you for your testimony, and we look forward to working with both of you in the next several months. We're going to be obviously paying very close attention and escalating our level of attention to these issues. But I would ask both agencies to move quickly. The urgency of the problem is, I think, now unquestioned, and I think the public and the world is looking to us to find answers to these questions in a timely, telescope time frame way. So we thank both of you for your testimony. And our second panel, if they would move up as soon as the first panel. While you're doing that, I will mention that both Virgin Atlantic and Boeing have submitted testimony for the record, and I ask the unanimous consent to include the testimony of Boeing and Virgin Atlantic in the record at this point. So we welcome the second panel. The second panel is going to have as a lead-off witness Mr. Jim May, who is the president and CEO of the Air Transport Association. He was named the president and CEO in February of 2003. Prior to joining the ATA, Mr. May served as executive vice president for the National Association of Broadcasters. So our paths have been crossing since the beginning of time. And Mr. May's father was also a member of this body, of the United States Congress. So, it's obviously a place that you're very familiar with and comfortable with, and we welcome you back. And whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, albeit in, as you point out, a somewhat different context. And it was my mother, actually, who served from the great state of Washington.
Really?
For a number of years.
What years were they?
58 through 72.
So she was one of the very first members, huh?
One of the early members, and of course the state of Washington has had a great tradition of women serving in high elected positions, and we're all very proud of that.
Yeah, I thought it was your father all those years. So whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'll emphasize first 3 points. First, commercial airlines are extremely greenhouse gas efficient. Second, we are proactively committed to further limiting greenhouse gas footprints and are actively, aggressively pursuing a comprehensive plan to achieve that outcome. Third, I think there's a critical role for the federal government to play, not for the industry, not against the industry, but rather with it. Commercial airlines are extremely greenhouse gas efficient. Aviation has a decidedly strong track record that I think is often overlooked or misstated. We contribute just 2% of domestic greenhouse gas emissions today compared to 25% for the balance of the transportation industry. I think this is no small achievement given that we are essential to the economy, support nearly 9% of U.S. employment. Today's airplanes are not just smarter, they're quieter, cleaner, use less fuel than ever before, and we fly them smarter, as has been talked about today. U.S. airlines have been able to deliver more value by constantly improving fuel efficiency through fuel reinvestment in technology and efficient operations. We improved our efficiency over 100% between 1978 and 2006, resulting in 2.3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide savings, which is the equivalent, as the slide shows, of taking 17 million cars off the road in each of those years. While doing that, we burned 4% less fuel in 2006 than in year 2000, carried 12% more passengers, 22% more cargo. Our greenhouse gas efficiency compares favorably to other sectors and modes. Today, our planes are as fuel efficient, as was testified by the FAA, as compact cars, and at the same time, we're carrying more goods and people over 6 times faster. We are highly motivated to continue this trend. Fuel is our largest cost center, averaging 50% of operating expenses, costing us $41.2 billion in 2007 and projected to grow to $55 billion in 2008. So the market is sending the commercial airlines the price signal that some call for in legislation. As demand for air service grows, some growth in aviation is predicted. But that's a good thing. We're key to driving a more environmentally efficient economy, optimizing global value chains, and creating greater social and economic opportunities for people. Let's keep growth in context. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has determined that under the most likely scenario, carbon dioxide from global aviation in 2050 will grow to about 3% of total man-made carbon dioxide emissions from the 2% it is today. Now, at the core of our efforts, carriers have made a commitment going forward to improve fuel efficiency by an additional 30% by 2025. That's roughly equivalent to taking over 13 million additional cars off the road each year. These improvements will come only from our continuing airlines' investments. In fact, achieving our goal will require approximately a $730 billion investment between now and 2025, which is a high hurdle under any circumstances, but particularly in these difficult financial times. Recognizing that today's carbon-based fuel supply can only take us so far, our airlines are also making extensive resource commitments to stimulate the development of commercially viable, environmentally friendly alternative fuels through CAFE, which has been talked about earlier. Congressional leadership, however, is needed, and it's in 4 areas. First, we would hope that Congress will work to ensure that our outdated air traffic control system is modernized to permit more direct routes, saving fuel and emissions. Studies show this will reduce emissions by 10 to 15% on top of the 30% that we're already projecting for fuel savings. Next, we urge Congress to reinvigorate NASA and FAA environmental aeronautics R&D programs. Additional revolutionary advances in airframe and engine technology can only come through the government-led R&D that serves to preserve America's leadership in aeronautics. Third, we ask Congress to spur further commercial development of alternative and environmentally sensitive jet fuels. And finally, we urge you to calibrate any climate change-related legislation so it doesn't work against our efforts. To continue our fuel efficiency and other advances, we've got to have the capital to invest. Punitive economic measures that siphon funds out of our industry would severely threaten that progress. So accordingly, while we don't believe a further economic measure such as cap and trade is necessary for aviation, if such a measure were to be applied, it should be carefully calibrated to take key considerations into account. They include allocation of allowances to reflect aviation's fuel efficiency achievements to date, reinvestment of proceeds into aviation, very important, and accounting for the reality that aviation is a global business. In closing, Mr. Chairman, the airlines have a great environmental track record and are committed to improving on that. Congressional leadership is needed. We're asking you not to work for us. We're asking you to work with us as we address the important environmental and energy concerns that we all have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. Our next witness is Tom Windmuller. He is the Senior Vice President for International Air Transport Association. He's a longtime veteran on these issues, and we welcome you before our panel.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We appreciate the opportunity to brief the committee on the steps aviation industry is taking to reduce its environmental footprint. Let me begin by saying that we support and endorse everything that my colleague Jim May has already said. Climate change is a big global problem. The air transport industry is a small but significant part of that big problem. The title of today's hearing signaled to me that it's important to put aviation emissions in perspective. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that aviation currently represents 2% of global carbon emissions and could reach 3% in the next 43 years. More importantly, the air transport industry has an enviable record of significantly reducing its environmental footprint. Over the last 40 years, we have eliminated black smoke from aircraft engines while reducing noise and increasing fuel efficiency by 75%. Since 1997 alone, IATA members have improved their fuel efficiency by a full 20% with a corresponding reduction in CO2. I'm not aware of any other industry with this green a track record. However, the aviation industry is not resting on its record of success. We've set ourselves a target to improve fuel efficiency by an additional 25% by 2020, and we will reach this target by replacing old aircraft and retrofitting the remaining fleet. I would note, as has already been said, that our American members, also represented here today by my colleague at the Air Transport Association, have set themselves an even tougher target of 30% better fuel efficiency by 2025, and their leadership will serve as an example for the rest of the world. IATA has an aggressive four-pillar strategy in place to achieve carbon neutrality and ultimately zero carbon aviation emissions. We are confident that we will reach this greener future that we all strive for by investing in fuel-efficient technology, flying planes more effectively, building and using efficient infrastructure, and developing and implementing positive economic incentives. Some may doubt our ability to reach these goals. However, airlines have an enormous incentive to achieve these targets as quickly as possible. Today, IATA Airlines face a $156 billion fuel bill that represents 32% of their operating costs. Our only hope to survive as viable businesses is to increase our fuel efficiency. Greater fuel efficiency means less carbon. It's that simple. In 2007, IATA worked with airlines and governments around the world to reduce our members' carbon emissions by 10.5 million tons through the implementation of more efficient air routes and flying smarter. We anticipate that the introduction of the Boeing 787 and similar equipment, along with promising work in alternative fuels, will result in significant additional savings going forward. However, we cannot reach our goal of carbon neutrality, let alone zero carbon emissions, alone. Let me suggest to this committee what it can do and what it should not do to help us reduce and ultimately eliminate these emissions. First, we need Congress to restore FAA and NASA funding of research into lighter materials, radical new aerodynamics, and new algae-based fuels. Perhaps there's also a role here for the national labs. Secondly, we need the Congress to fund the next generation of air traffic control in the U.S. and insist that the FAA accelerate its implementation. Thirdly, we need you to pursue positive economic measures, such as tax credits for airlines and manufacturers that invest in cleaner technologies. And most importantly of all, we need this committee to avoid the temptation of imposing a barrier on the industry achieving these challenging environmental goals that we have set. For example, if the U.S. government were to pursue an emissions trading scheme that is as flawed as that being considered by the European Union, that would only postpone the day when we reach our ambitious environmental targets. The European ETS scheme is green in name only. As currently designed, it will act as a carbon tax and reduce the resources airlines have to effectively address this challenge, thereby postponing our progress. It's an illegal, unilateral scheme that proposes to address a global problem with a short-sighted, piecemeal approach. It's bad policy that will hinder rather than help us all reach our goal of carbon neutrality and ultimately carbon emissions. We urge the committee to strongly consider the positive role it can play in advancing our shared goals of a carbon-free future and avoid the temptation of taxes and charges in the name of the environment that will only postpone the day we reach these goals. We welcome the opportunity to work with this committee going forward to ensure that our shared visions become reality. Thank you for your consideration. I'd be pleased to take your questions.
Thank you, sir, very much. And our final witness is Mr. Daron Lobas.
Actually, Darren Lovas, Mr. Chairman.
Darren.
Challenging name. So.
What's the name of the point guard for the Utah Jazz? Do you know?
Oh, Duran. Yeah.
Duran.
No, that's right. That's
same
right.
spelling.
Very same spelling. That's exactly right. There's more than one of us. I think I'm the only.
So you're
Darren.
the point guy on this. And,
right.
Yeah, and you're the Transportation and Energy Co-Director of the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, on these issues. And we welcome you, sir, whenever you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to testify today. And just referring back, launching the Apollo program to send a man to the moon in the 1960s, President Kennedy made it clear that we do that not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because the challenge is one that we are willing.
Mr. Inslee could be here.
What's that?
Here. I wish Mr. Inslee has written
he
a book.
gets to hear. That's right.
I wish he was here.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're in a similar situation with aviation, which is central to a new choice we face as a nation, whether we're going to hew to a path that cuts heat-trapping pollution as well as oil dependence, or take a path of towards dangerous climate change. Government can and must step up into a leadership role if aviation is to thrive in a carbon-constrained world by taking steps which will boost efficiency and develop cleaner energy alternatives. Transportation will make up 28% of the U.S. energy demand in 2008. Jet fuel will account for 11% of that energy demand. However, it will only account for about 3% of total energy demand. As of 2004, it accounted for about 12% of total heat-trapping carbon dioxide emissions in the United States. But heat-trapping emissions continue to grow because aviation is one of the fastest-growing sectors in the economy, and those emissions are exacerbated by the fact that altitude enhances the climate-forcing properties of pollutants in a plane's wake. And as the witness from the FAA stated, the science is still somewhat unclear, but it's clear there is an enhancement effect. The size of it, the magnitude of it is in question. Unfortunately, a big entity, the Air Force, is in pursuit of alternative synthetic liquid fuels, specifically liquid coal. This is like the tail wagging the dog when it comes to fuel, since the military uses less than 2% of total transportation fuel, and the Air Force is merely a subset of that. Liquid coal as a substitute is fundamentally at odds with other national priorities such as fiscal responsibility and climatic stability. According to the Department of Energy, liquid coal produces double the global warming emissions compared to conventional gasoline. Even if CO2 released by liquid coal plants is captured and stored, the emissions would still be higher than the emissions from today's crude oil system. And launching this industry is an expensive proposition with each plant costing billions of dollars. Some in aviation seem keen on other high-carbon substitutes. United and American Airlines have both gone on the record supporting the expansion of a pipeline system bringing tar sands derived oil to the Chicago region, where refining of tar sands by ConocoPhillips is directly linked to O'Hare Airport. There's also renewed interest in carbon-intensive oil shale development in the West, specifically from the Air Force. Instead, what we need to do is make much more efficient use of jet fuel by taking these steps. Transition to more fuel-efficient airplanes and engines. Which includes exciting developments like the Boeing 787, which I know Mr. Inslee mentioned earlier, which uses 20% less fuel than comparable aircraft. Improved air traffic control can also yield energy and CO2 savings, and here I'll quote Jim May, who says rightly that studies consistently have shown that modernization of the air traffic control system will improve fuel efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 10 to 15%. But no matter how efficiently used, something needs to fill the tank. We should either stick with conventional fuel for aviation or look for substitutes that are lower, not higher in carbon intensity. Biofuels show some promise. In partnership with Boeing and GE Aviation, Virgin Atlantic, as they say in their testimony, I imagine, already successfully tested the use of a blend of jet fuel and biofuel in a flight from London to Amsterdam, and Continental planned something similar in early 2009. One possible source for aviation is algae, a net absorber of carbon dioxide and a source of energy-rich oil that can be turned into fuel. Investments in intercity rail as an alternative short-haul mode of transport should also be part of the strategy. A full, high-speed electric train emits between 1/10 and 1/4 of aircraft greenhouse gas emissions. And also, the more oil we save elsewhere in transportation, the lower the need for substitutes for aviation. Indeed, NRDC projects that new policies enacted thanks to this Congress in 2007 will save almost 4 million barrels of oil a day nationally by 2030. That's a good start, and Congress must go further by taking these steps. First, do no harm. We need to protect and monitor implementation of Section 526 of the 2007 Energy Bill, a federal procurement provision that provides a much-needed backstop to ensure the federal government does not use its purchasing power to buy fuels that produce more global warming pollution than conventional gasoline. Second, NRDC has joined 5 states and the District of Columbia, as well as 4 fellow organizations led by Earth Justice, to petition the EPA to regulate emissions of heat-trapping pollution. EPA has regulated emissions from aircraft pursuant to the Clean Air Act, but not those that contribute to global warming. As the Chairman said earlier, I believe, to the EPA witness, we believe now is the time for that to change. Although there are improvements that should be made, thirdly, the Lieberman-Warner bill, as passed by the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, is a very strong start toward an economy-wide climate stabilization strategy. The bill includes a low-carbon fuel standard, a technology-neutral and performance-based standard for transportation fuels. And fourth, again, to quote Jim May, Congress should ensure that our outdated, inefficient air traffic control system is modernized. The solution, as the Energy Security Leadership Council called for in 2006, is for Congress to require the FAA to improve commercial air traffic routing. And then last but not least, we agree with the ATA on the need to reinvigorate NASA and FAA environmental aeronautics research and development programs. For aviation, big breakthroughs in structures and engines, as well as low-carbon energy substitutes, are hard to come by. The federal government must help spur leaps forward in technology, as it did with the Apollo space program. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Let me recognize the gentleman from Missouri for a round of questions.
I have a roaming microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of during the panel previous to your kind presence here, there was a mention of the fact that perhaps biofuels would be dangerous to airlines. Do any of you have any notion that at some point our technology would reach the point where biofuels could in fact be used in aircraft?
Mr. Cleaver, I think we've had some experiments that have taken place already that show that biofuels have some very real promise. What we all need to be concerned about is the safety issue, in particular the exacting specifications required for aviation fuel that are driven in no small part by the realities of altitude and the realities of temperature. So we are, through CAFE, as others are, very committed to trying to find as many reasonable alternatives as possible to include biofuels, but with the understanding and the recognition that we all have to be very sensitive to the exact specifications. We recently, our board, adopted a set of specifications that we think are going to be important, and we are very, very committed because in addition to the fuel savings of traditional fuels, in addition to the savings for air traffic control, in addition, our alternative fuels become critical. And to buttress a point that my colleague said a minute ago from NRDC, we want to make sure they are net positive from an environmental standpoint.
Well, I think we do as well, and that is encouraging. Now, Airbus and Boeing are manufacturing 2 passenger airliners. They're much lighter and much more costly. And I'm wondering how much longer do you think it would take to change our inventory to the lighter aircraft using far less fossil fuel?
I know Tom will have some comments on this as well, but between, I think, I'll reserve judgment on the exact year, but over the last 4 or 5 years, we've spent an additional $33 billion on fuel. It's our #1 cost center. That equates to roughly 330 aircraft. So it is a function of the financing of this industry and it leads me to the point that is central to my testimony, which is we want to be as green as anybody else in this world. We think we are doing a terrific job of doing that. We need to make sure that the legislative and regulatory environment permits us to continue to invest the multi-billions of dollars in new aircraft, new avionics for use in the next generation air traffic control system, which I hope will be the now generation, not next generation, ATC, and development of fuels, et cetera. So it is a very expensive proposition.
I agree entirely with that. If I can put a slightly different spin on it, over the last 3 years, the airline community has ordered 6,000 new airplanes. And today there are about 19,000 commercial aircraft in operation. So about 30% of that 19,000 has been ordered new in the last 3 years. The production lines for some of these new models, such as the A380, the Boeing 787, are sold out for the next several years. As Jim said, our members have every incentive they need to be as fuel efficient as they possibly can be.
Well, let me just say, Mr. Chairman, before I relinquish my time, it is refreshing to have you here before this committee. I went home somewhat depressed yesterday after having the oil executives here. They also talked about greens, but they talked about greening their pockets, and so it is just infinitely more refreshing to have you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, may I comment on that last statement?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I would note that Lieberman Warner will cost this industry somewhere between $85 and $100 billion between now and 2025, because we would be, of necessity, forced to buy permits for our activities. And the money goes, interestingly, to the oil companies under the current construct of that legislation. So I think it's somewhat ironic that we've got this hearing juxtaposed with the one you held yesterday.
Talk to our committee about that. Thank you. Gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Herseth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses and the very insightful written statements you've submitted and for your testimony today. I must say, Mr. May, you've made some very commendable recent hiring decisions.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for that.
Well, Mr. Cleaver pursued some of the area I wanted to go in the direction of jet biofuels. But given how you described, the investments that you want to make in the upcoming years in addition to what you've already made, and I appreciate the comment you just made as to the economic impact of Warner Lieberman and being in agreement on the out goals and what we can do between now and then economically within different sectors of the economy. But it is an expensive proposition. So are you aware of any support, financial or otherwise, that foreign governments or agencies are providing to non-U.S. airlines or to U.S. airlines with the goal of developing alternative jet fuels, including biofuels?
Tom, you may have an answer to that. I'm not aware of foreign governments that are engaged in it, but you may well.
The European Union has committed approximately €1 billion to this type of research. But frankly speaking, that amount of money is a drop in the ocean of what will be needed to accelerate the implementation of third-generation biofuels that can actually have a real impact on the carbon footprint of this industry.
Which may go to the issue of the Air Force looking at some of the synthetic fuels that are more cost-effective right now. I've spoken with General Mosley about this, Mr. Lovas, and we know that there have been test flights using synthetic fuels that are coal to liquid. I agree, we want a net positive impact, and from an environmental perspective, my sense is that DOD is pursuing this because while you cited some some percentages, for the DoD, their largest line item in the Air Force budget is their fuel, from what I've been told, as it relates to their operating costs. So I think we need to address this sort of what are the short-term strategies for certain agencies versus the mid-range and the long-term, which was actually one of the reasonable things that we heard yesterday in yesterday's hearing in terms of the strategies that we have to pursue. But I would just make note as a response to saying that the investment so far has been so minimal that we have to look at, again, mid-range and broad range, long range, what we're going to be able to accomplish in making government investment in addition to what the private sector is doing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, gentlelady, I think there is about 3 minutes left to go for the roll calls on the House floor. There will be 3 roll calls. So I do have a number of questions for the panel that I'm going to submit to you in writing. And I would ask for your timely written response to these questions, but I just think as a logistical reality right now, we'll be out of session here for about half an hour anyway. And I just think it's probably out of courtesy to all of you for So with the thanks of the committee, this hearing is adjourned. And,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Things about you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.